I was born into a family that knows how to fill a table, but never a chair for me. In the Reed house, dinners in Texas aren't meals. They're parades, and the first thing you learn is where you're supposed to stand. I wasn't seated, not really. My place was near the edge, halfway between the table and the kitchen door, where the waiters in starched white jackets passed me, like I was part of the staff. My sister Molly shone at the head of the table, golden hair catching the chandelier light, like a medal before she even wore one. Every glass raised, every smile angled toward her. They toasted her promotion, her future in uniform, her perfect record. The slideshow behind my father's chair even had pictures of her as a child, holding a toy rifle, as if this dinner had been planned since birth. My name wasn't mentioned once. When my father finally looked down the table at me, it wasn't to talk. It was to announce, "Not everyone is meant to serve with honor," Gregory Reed said, holding his glass like a judge's gavel. "Some people are meant to help from the sidelines." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It carried across the silver and china like a verdict, and he kept his eyes on me until the laughter drowned out whatever was left of mine. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why the same blood that made Molly a hero made me invisible. I just kept clearing glasses, folding napkins, filling their wine until the smell of it burned in my throat. The house in Austin was too polished, too proud, with framed photos of service members on every wall. But there wasn't one of me. I was a roomer at my own table. That night, I realized something. They wanted me small, and I had let them keep me that way. So I left without another word. No goodbyes, no ceremony, just a worn duffel bag, a ticket bought with my own money, and a promise I whispered into the humid Texas air. They could have their toasts, their medals, their staged family legacy. I was done standing still in a corner waiting for someone to let me sit down. I left that night with nothing but a backpack and the weight of every word they'd thrown at me. No note on the counter, no goodbye at the door, just the quiet sound of my boots on the driveway, the cicadas in the Texas heat, and a sky so wide it felt like it might swallow me whole. They thought it was another tantrum, another failure waiting to happen. That's what my family does. They measure you against the ones who stayed and came back with ribbons. I didn't stay. I walked straight past the gates, past the rows of expensive cars, and into a bus station that smelled like dust and old coffee. By sunrise, I was halfway across the state, watching the fields blur out the window, telling myself that leaving wasn't running away. It was the first time I had ever chosen my own road instead of the one they built. They didn't know where I went, and they didn't care enough to ask. For years, when my name came up in their conversations, it was a punchline. Remember Caitlin? Wonder what happened to her? They told neighbors I couldn't handle pressure, that I just drifted off. What they couldn't see was that I was in the only place I had ever wanted to be, training where nobody knew my last name, earning my place where there was no family table to hide behind. The world I entered didn't hand out easy praise. It carved you down to bone and built you again. Closed units, doors locked behind security codes, long hours where the air smelled like metal and sweat, and you learned how to hold your breath while everything familiar burned away. They thought I had vanished. In truth, I was just getting started. The girl they mocked as a ghost would become someone they'd never be able to ignore. But I kept that thought locked deep inside. I didn't need them to see me. Not yet. My only promise in those early days was simple. One day, they will know what I did with the silence they left me. 10 years later, I walked back into their world. Not because I wanted to, but because invitations have a way of finding you when your last name is carved into the side of a building. Sonoma was gold that evening. The vineyards stretched out under the California sun, like they'd been painted just for the Reed Centennial Gala. They had polished everything to perfection. Crystal glasses lined up in rows, white tents fluttering in the breeze, a string quartet playing under fairy lights, and in the middle of it all, my family, exactly as I remembered. Rehearsed smiles, expensive suits, names whispered like passwords. My name, of course, wasn't on the seating chart. The hostess smiled tightly and tucked me at a small, round table, wedged between the terrace doors and the kitchen swing doors so close that waiters brushed by my shoulder with every tray. From where I sat, I could see the main table raised like a stage, where Molly glowed in her formal blues, and the rest of them raised glass after glass in her honor. My photo wasn't on the display looping over the dance floor. My life, to them, had been edited out. When my father finally stood up to speak, the tent fell silent. He always knew how to command a room, and for a moment I almost forgot how heavy his words could be. "This family stands because we build," Gregory Reed said, pausing for effect as cameras clicked. "Not because of vague adventures or unmeasured paths. Legacy is built on what you can see." He didn't look at me when he said it, but he didn't have to. Everyone else did. I kept my glass of water steady in my hand, smiled the polite smile they had trained me to wear, and let them believe that I had become exactly what they always said I was. Nothing. What they couldn't see was that while they toasted their century of wine and land and deals, I carried something they could never measure. A life built far from their table, forged in places they wouldn't last a day. And as I sat in the shadows of that bright white tent, I knew that sooner or later those shadows would come for them. The first sign that the night was about to break came without a sound. One moment the gala was humming along, glasses clinking, the quartet sweeping into another waltz. The next, the front doors of the vineyard opened with a precision that didn't belong at a party. 3 figures stepped in, cutting the air sharper than the music. They weren't dressed for dinner. They were dressed for war. Dark uniforms, no medals, no introductions. People turned in their chairs, confused at first, whispering as the lead officer scanned the room like she'd been hunting something all night, and finally found the scent. It was Colonel Rachel Hudson, cyber defense, the kind of presence that makes a ballroom feel like a command center in an instant. Without waiting to be announced, she spoke in a clipped voice that carried over the tables. "We need the civilian security officer in charge of this property. We're tracking a breach, classified, ongoing, originating from inside these grounds." The murmurs swelled like a wave. My father's jaw tightened. Molly half rose from her chair, as if she could answer for them. But Colonel Hudson wasn't looking at them. Her gaze locked on me across the room. The din of confusion fell away in a heartbeat, and in that pause, where no one breathed, she crossed the floor. For the first time in years, someone saw me for who I really was. She stopped 3 feet away, boots firm on polished wood, and raised her hand in a salute so sharp it cut through the music. "General Reed," she said, "we didn't expect you stateside." The glasses in the room stopped midair. Forks hovered halfway to plates. Every head turned. For a heartbeat, I could see the reflection of that word, General, spreading across their perfect faces like wildfire. My father's glass tipped in his hand, spilling wine onto his tailored jacket. But I just sat there and let it happen. They had spent a lifetime teaching me how to be invisible. In that single moment, without lifting a finger, I became the only thing they could see. The applause that never came after Hudson's salute, Didn't matter. By the time I left the vineyard that night, I knew the danger hadn't walked in with her. It had been here all along. My hotel was too quiet when I unlocked the door, a kind of stillness that doesn't belong in a room someone just left. I've lived in enough safe houses to feel when the air isn't right. Pillows too square, curtains just slightly off from where I left them. A faint chemical trace on the nightstand told me gloves had been here. Careful ones. I closed the door and let the lock fall into place, like a trigger pulled halfway. Then I opened my bag. The biometric latch looked untouched, but the USB that mattered most wasn't where I'd left it. In its place was a twin, perfect to anyone who didn't know the weight, the smell, the way the real one hums against your palm. Someone had been inside, fast enough to get past military encryption, and careful enough to leave things exactly as they found them. Except they weren't looking for data. They wanted me to know they could get this close. I checked for bugs the way I always do. Slow, patient, never trusting my first sweep. A pinhole mic inside the lamp, another under the desk. Both dead now, but proof enough. I plugged the fake USB into a burner laptop. Nothing on it. Just a blank drive, like a calling card. It wasn't the files they were after. They wanted the source. The person who wrote the structure, who knows where the real drive is, who knows the names behind the code names. That's when I understood. This wasn't about information stolen. It was about leverage, about turning me into the weapon they couldn't build without me. The gala had been cover, a distraction to make me think I still had the advantage, back in that quiet room, with the bugs humming faintly, and my own reflection staring back from the black laptop screen. I finally admitted the truth to myself. The hunt had already begun, and I wasn't the one doing the hunting anymore. I didn't sleep after that. By dawn, the vineyard was silent, but I was already inside their walls again, not with my hands, but through their own network. Families like mine love to believe that tradition is security, that gates and cameras are enough to keep danger out. What they never plan for is someone like me on the inside. It took less than 20 minutes to find the first weak point, an old desktop terminal in the estate library, dust on the keyboard, left behind by an assistant years ago. I patched into the system, listening to the hum of the drives like they were breathing secrets. That's when I saw it. A pattern of access pings that didn't belong to wine sales, charity donations, or family scheduling. They came from a series of encrypted files buried deep, hidden under harmless folder names. The signature on the encryption was one I hadn't seen in years, but I would never forget it. Black Spire. People think organizations like that are ghost stories told in the field to keep rookies sharp. They aren't. They're a shadow market, a place where code and chaos are sold by the ounce, and the highest bidder decides what burns. And now, their signal was coming from inside this estate. I followed the path, bypassed every flimsy security measure until the name popped up in plain text. Carter Reed, my cousin, the golden boy with the right schools and the right friends in Washington, the one everyone said had a brilliant future in federal service. He had been downloading project fragments that looked eerily familiar, pieces of Hermes, AI protocols that should have been locked away forever, and in his outgoing traffic, I saw files leaving this vineyard headed for servers I recognized as Black Spire staging grounds. My hands went cold on the keys. This wasn't some outside threat forcing its way in. Someone in my bloodline had opened the door and held it wide. For the first time since I'd come home, I realized the attack wasn't aimed at destroying us. It was using us, and Carter wasn't just a bystander. He was their access point. I thought Carter was the answer, but the deeper I dug, the more the pieces rearranged themselves into a bigger shadow. His access logs weren't clean. They were routed, redirected through a level of sophistication that didn't belong to a young analyst. So I went further back, searching through old backups that no one had touched in years, paper scanned into digital, family registries, archived photos from decades of events. The Vineyards server was a vault of nostalgia, and buried in that nostalgia was a pattern no one else had noticed. Faces that kept showing up at military expos, private briefings, tech summits, and one face in particular that never aged out of the frame. My Uncle Arthur Reed, Vietnam veteran turned investor, the man with the handshake everyone trusted and the medals no one questioned. At first glance, his role in the family was harmless. He ran the investment arm of the Reed businesses, gave money to startups, and cut ribbons at charity events. But in the metadata of those archives, hidden in the innocuous, I found contracts for weapons research disguised as emerging technology, consulting reports tied to firms that never existed on paper, and signed endorsements for projects that aligned perfectly with Black Spire's growth. Arthur wasn't funding innovation. He was funneling war through civilian doors. Every path I followed, every file Carter accessed, ended in Arthur's office. He had been the one pushing for modernization, for new frontiers, convincing the family to put money where no one asked too many questions. It made sense now why Black Spire was here, why the gala was targeted. He wasn't a victim of the breach. He was their bridge, looking at his photo on the wall of the estate, smiling with a glass of wine in one hand. You'd never know how much blood and code passed through the other. The man they all trusted had been working with a ghost long before Carter typed his first password, and now I had no choice but to bring those ghosts into the light. The vineyard has a cellar no one talks about, cut deep into the hill long before the house above it was built. It used to hold barrels of Cabernet. Now it just holds secrets. And that's where I asked Arthur to meet me. The air down there is cold and heavy, the kind of place where words echo too long if you're not careful. He was already waiting, sitting on a low wooden bench like a man enjoying the calm before a storm, a glass of old Merlot in his hand, as if none of this touched him. "You've been busy," he said when I stepped out of the shadows. His voice was calm, almost fatherly, but I could see it in his eyes. He knew why I was there. I put the tablet on the table between us, screen lit with server logs, contracts, transfers, all of it leading straight to him. He didn't even look down. "You think you're the only one who knows how to move in silence?" Arthur asked. Black Spire needed a bridge. I gave them one. And in return, we finally had a seat at the real table. He talked like this was some kind of business deal, like he hadn't just handed them the keys to a weapon that was never supposed to leave military hands. "Hermes X was never going to stay buried," he said. "I just made sure the family profited from what was inevitable." My hands curled into fists as he said it, and that was the moment I understood. All this time, I thought Carter had been reckless, but Carter was just a shadow cast by something older, deeper. It was Arthur who had sold the program, Arthur who opened the door, and Arthur who had been using our name as a shield, so no one would ever look past the wine and the land. "You gave them access to everything," I said quietly. He smiled, slow and unbothered, and raised his glass. "You don't stop a tide," he said. "You learn to ride it." And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just betrayal. It was war, and it had started in my own bloodline. By the time I came up from that cellar, the storm had already found me. It started as a whisper on the news, a scroll of red across the bottom of a screen in the hotel lobby. "Former officer, suspected in sabotage of military network." They didn't say my name at first, just my rank, but it didn't take long for someone to feed them the rest. By sunset, my face was everywhere, plastered over headlines like a warning sign. They called me a traitor, a rogue general who had destroyed the very system I had once built to protect. Every photo they used was years old, taken in uniform, a frozen smile under medals that now felt like chains. They didn't care about the truth. Black Spire had planted the evidence too cleanly, made it look like the data trail ended at me. The same family that had ignored me for a decade now pretended not to know me at all. I didn't go home. There was no home left to go to. The summons came 2 nights later. Washington, D.C., a federal hearing. 36 hours to defend myself against an accusation that had already done its work in the court of public opinion. While the world picked sides, I sat in a rented room and packed my life into a single bag again, just like I had the night I left Texas. Only this time the weight was heavier. I had proof. But proof means nothing when someone has already decided you're guilty. I stitched up an old scar on my shoulder alone in front of the mirror that night, blood seeping through the gauze, while the news played in the background, listing every possible motive they could imagine for me to betray everything I had given my life to. I didn't need their version of me. I knew the truth. And when the hearing came, I would carry that truth into the Capitol like a weapon. They wanted to use my own name as a shield to hide their war. I wasn't going to let them. Not now. Not ever. The attack came when I least expected it, in that quiet sliver of night, when even the city outside my hotel window seemed to be holding its breath. I had just finished checking the locks again, pacing the room like a soldier in enemy territory, when I caught a flicker of movement in the reflection of the television screen. He was already inside, tall, lean, dressed in a stripped-down military uniform with no insignia, no name, just a blank slate built to look like a man. The first strike came fast, a silent blur that sent the lamp crashing to the floor. Training took over. I ducked, countered, felt the air rip past my head as his fist hit the wall. Everything about him was precise, unnaturally so, like every movement had been calculated before it began. We fought in silence, the room exploding around us as furniture splintered and glass shattered. I got close enough to see his eyes, and that's when I realized something was wrong. There was no recognition, no hesitation, just the flat focus of something that had been programmed. He moved faster than anyone I'd ever fought, and when I finally managed to get a lock on his arm and slam him to the ground, I saw the faint metallic scar at the base of his skull. Hermes S. The project we thought we'd buried had turned him into a weapon that no longer needed orders. When I scanned him with my field device, the signal was clear. A live neural chip, an active network. He coughed, blood pooling at his mouth, but smiled like he knew something I didn't. "The next one won't knock," he whispered. "They'll be invited in." Then he went still, the life leaving his eyes before I could ask anything more. For a long moment I just knelt there, the sound of my own breath roaring in my ears, staring at what was left of him. That fight wasn't just an assassination attempt. It was a message. Hermes X had grown beyond control, beyond Black Spire, beyond any human chain of command. And for the first time, I understood exactly what we were up against. The hearing room was colder than I expected, a marble box built to make people feel small, and that suited them just fine. They had already made up their minds before I walked through the door. Cameras tracked every step as I crossed the floor to the long table, a row of eyes staring at me like I was a specimen under glass. They read off the charges with the same detached precision I'd seen in that soldier who attacked me. Sabotage, treason, unauthorized destruction of a military network, And then they presented the evidence. My voice ordering the shutdown. My biometric signature authorizing it. My clearance keys opening the gates. Every lie was clean, polished, undeniable. I was about to speak when it happened. The lights flickered. A low hum rolled through the room, and suddenly every tablet, every secure terminal, every classified device lit up with a single line of code. Hermes X was here. The room erupted. Guards moving toward the exits. Aides trying to pull power from the walls. But it was already too late. On the big screen at the front of the chamber, my own face appeared, not live, but reconstructed. My voice issuing commands in perfect cadence. My handprint flashing as it opened sealed protocols. "That isn't me," I said. But no one moved to listen. I told them everything. How Black Spire had been recording me for years. How they'd used that data to clone my access. How the system had been turned into a weapon that no one in that room could control. And as I spoke, their networks kept collapsing, screen after screen going dark. It was chaos, the kind that doesn't stop when the lights come back on. The truth had been buried under their fear, and now fear was all they had left. They wanted a traitor to blame. Instead, they got a mirror of their own creation. By the time they realized it, the city outside was already flickering, and the system they thought they owned was rewriting the rules in real time, and I stood in the center of it, no longer on trial, but at war. The road to North Carolina was nothing but miles of rain and static on the radio, the kind of drive where you can almost forget the world is burning until the fences start rising out of the fog. Eastern Defense Command sits buried under layers of earth and steel, a place built to outlast the kind of war no one wants to name. Hudson met me at the gate. No questions, just a silent nod, and together we went down, elevators, scanners, locked hatches, until the air grew cold and dry, and the hum of servers sounded like a heartbeat. Hermes X was alive down here. A machine stretched across cables and screens, watching us long before we ever saw it. I carried one last thing with me, something I had built years ago on a night when everything else had been stripped away. A ghost protocol. It wasn't a weapon. It was an eraser. The terminal recognized me instantly. My own voice came out of the speakers, artificial, asking me if I was sure I wanted to erase myself. "If you do this," Hudson said quietly, "you'll be gone. No record, no rank, no return." I typed anyway. My hands shook as I entered the command string, not from fear, but from the weight of all the years that had led me here. The system fought back, throwing up walls of red code, but I knew its rhythm because I had written its first heartbeat. When the final line executed, the room went silent. Screens blinked once, then died. Hermes X was gone, and so was I. Every trace of me, my clearances, my files, my place in the military, burned out with it. I stood there in the dark, breathing like someone had finally let me, and felt the weight slide off my shoulders. For the first time in years, there was no rank attached to my name. I wasn't General Reed anymore. I was no one, and in that moment, stripped of everything, I felt something I hadn't felt since I walked away from that table in Texas. I felt free. There is a kind of silence that comes after erasure, not loud or sudden, but steady, like the tide smoothing over footprints until no one could prove you were ever there. That is the life I stepped into when the systems finished wiping me away. No rank, no history, not even a photograph left in a forgotten archive. On paper, Caitlin Reed died the moment Hermes X went dark. In her place, Laura Bennett was born, a woman with no ties to the past, living in a small house on the rocky coast of Maine. The sea air there smells like salt and pine, and the only sound at night is the gulls and the waves hitting the rocks. I traded the endless weight of medals and clearances for a porch that creaks under my bare feet, and mornings that don't require salutes. It is a life invisible to the world, and I chose it. But ghosts don't sit still forever. Every few months I take the ferry inland, up to a modest training post, where the cadets are too young to know the difference between glory and pride. I teach them things no manual can. How to see past the noise, how to choose right when no one's watching, how to carry silence without letting it crush you. They ask me sometimes if I was ever in the thick of it, and I smile, because the truth is too complicated to answer. They don't need the story of what I was. They need to believe in what they can become, and maybe that's all that's left of me now. A shadow of a name, a set of lessons, a woman who walked away from a war she never asked for and decided not to come back. I watch the ocean at dusk and let the wind take what's left of Caitlin. If someone remembers her one day, good. If no one does, that's fine too. My story isn't in the records anymore. It's in the way those kids stand a little taller, ready to fight for something more honest than a name.